Hi, everybody. My name is Chris, and I'm going to be your MC for the evening. You're in the right place if you're here for ImproveCareNow's virtual community conference. Great. So I want to start. If everyone could put your name in the chat, maybe your name, where you're from, if you go to an ICN center and feel comfortable sharing what that care center is, and if there's anything in particular you hope to learn tonight. I'll do mine verbally. My name is Chris. I'm from the capital of the great state of Ohio and home to The Ohio State University. I'm part of the reason I'm here tonight and do this work. My brother grew up with UC. He never had a support network like this. This was something that I wanted to do to make sure folks didn't have to go through the same thing that he did. And I can say events like this and events that happen at care centers across the country make it so a lot less kids and families have to go through that. And so very excited to see everybody here tonight. I don't know what that. So our hope for this evening, we want to build community. As one of my professors used to say, community without propinquity, right? So we're not together physically, but we are here together. Can celebrate successes and challenges, find a way to work through them together, find ways to get involved. And our goal is that there is something for everyone here. What do we want to accomplish? I've mentioned some of these things already. We want to increase your awareness of ImproveCareNow, better describe the opportunities to get involved, and hopefully you'll hear about something that either you can get involved with or that you can take away that can help in your day-to-day in your care. That's our goal, to improve care for kids and families. Our agenda for tonight, first we'll hear from our executive director and our clinical director. We have a recording of an Ignite talk that one of the Patient Advisory Council members gave at our in-person community conference. We're playing that. A fantastic session supporting the whole person in pediatric IBD care. That is a joint effort from some folks from Nationwide Children's Hospital, which happens to be right here in my hometown, Columbus, Ohio, and folks from the Patient Advisory Council. And then we're going to hear from our Patient Family Advisory Council and our Patient Advisory Council for the rest of, to close this out. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Kristen and Shazad, who are going to kick us off tonight.
Thanks, Chris. Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. Thanks. Well, I'm very happy to be with you tonight, and thank you very much. I know how busy everybody is and their competing priorities, and everybody's dealing with family pressures. And so thank you for taking a little time out to share this evening with us. And I hope that everybody finds a little something to take away with them after our time this evening. Next slide, please. Thanks. So 2 years ago, thanks. 2 years ago, we introduced this amazing graphic at an online community conference where our theme was, if you could go back, that one, perfect. Where our theme was reflection, resilience, and recovery. And the roots of the tree that you see in front of you represent our strong foundation at ICN that really enable individual and collaborative contributions to the network. The hands in the middle of the graphic represent our ability to come together as a community, to lift each other up and offer help and support, structure, and kindness. And the leaves on that tree represent new growth, innovation, and opportunity. Next slide. When we came together last year, we talked about what it meant to really cultivate our shared future as a community. Cultivate means to prepare for use or to acquire or develop. We talked about what was needed from us as a network to prepare for a shared, stronger future and how we might work together to create that future. What are our individual roles and responsibilities as part of ICN in cultivating that future? Next slide. And finally, here we are today. We are reemerging stronger together after nearly 3 years now of a global pandemic. We are reemerging into a brand new world and in some ways a new ICN. To reemerge means to come into sight or prominence again. And by nature, the word really implies a change in state or being. It's a transition from a relative stasis or dormancy to one of renewal and growth. And in some ways, ICN can be seen to have been in a period of relative quiet or stasis for the past couple of years. But under the surface, this community has continued to grow and innovate, preparing to reemerge even stronger. And in just a few minutes, we'll take a look at our network level data and the progress that we're making towards realizing our strategic goals. You'll see that ICN has indeed continued to innovate and grow our capabilities as a network. We've quietly maintained and even grown our center participation, and we are reemerging stronger than ever. And I believe better prepared to take on the next phase. And so just, over the next couple of hours, just take note of all of the things that have gone on, all of the incredible work that you'll see and the incredible work that's gone into the presentations this evening. Take note of that tonight, because these really are the things that make this community stronger than ever. Next slide. And you can go ahead and advance twice. Yep. So on the screen in front of you, you will see, one more time, please. You'll see 3 questions. How is the ICN team at your center, if you have one, stronger than ever? What makes you most energized about being a part of the ICN community? And what can you and or your center do to make ICN stronger than ever for the kids we care for? Take a minute to just reflect on some of these questions, and feel free to use the chat box to enter some of your thoughts either now or as we go through the evening. But these are really just prompts for you to think about what you all can do at home to help us as a network be stronger than ever, and how can we do the same for you? How can we help really bring each other up? Next slide, please. And before we dive into the next couple of hours, we always like to start in ICN with our purpose. We are guided, as always, by this common purpose and our community values that shape what we do and how we do it. We are motivated by this mission to do better for our community. Motivation is a feeling. It's sort of a general desire or a willingness to do something. And as everybody knows, motivation can come and go, and it can wax and wane. And when we compare that to momentum, momentum is an action, it's a force, it's an energy, and it's the strength that something has when it's moving. Our job is to convert that feeling of motivation into action, into momentum. Next slide. Great. So as is probably true for many of us, one of my favorite pandemic pastimes was watching a little too much Netflix. And about 6 months ago, I came across this show called A Playbook, A Coach's Rules for Life. Hopefully some of you have had the opportunity to see it. If you haven't, I highly suggest checking it out. Former NBA All-Star player and coach Doc Rivers has the honor of being the very first episode in the playbook, and it is one of my personal favorites. I'm going to share just a little anecdote that was discussed during the playbook, because I really think it's relevant to what we're doing here in the network right now. So in about 2006, right after Doc was named as their head coach, the Celtics had built a new practice facility. And on the walls around that facility hung their 16 NBA championship banners that they had achieved to date. And it just happened that there was sort of one blank space on the wall that really looked like it was kind of being held for number 17. And simply holding this space for that yet to be achieved 17th banner was not enough for Doc Rivers. It was a little bit too subtle for him. Next slide, please. So quietly at the start of the 2008 season, the Celtics coach turned a spotlight on that empty spot on the wall. And he left that spotlight on 24/7, leaving no doubt as to the team's goal for that year. Slide. Doc Rivers turned a spotlight on the gap as a means of never letting his team lose focus. And so I'd like us to think about, what is our gap in ICN and how do we shine a constant spotlight on it as a way to maintain momentum? Slide. ICN is driven always by its unrelenting focus on outcomes. It is our job to maintain this outcomes-driven focus, celebrate the work that we've done together so far, and shine a light on the work that is still to be done, the gap that we have yet to close. When I look at this chart, I see several things. I see a system that is stable, that is getting the exact results it is designed to deliver. And I see a system that slowly, about every 3 years or so, it's hard to tell because I know those dates on the bottom of the slide are very small, but about 3 years or so, we see an incremental increase in the percentage of patients, achieving clinical remission. Slide. I also see a gap that represents the faces of patients that are not yet in or sustaining clinical remission, a gap that represents the work that we have left to do. Slide. I see something similar when I look at this chart of our patients in sustained clinical remission. I recognize the impact that the past couple of years have had on our network, our centers, you all as patients and family members and providers of people struggling with IBD. Hospitals are struggling financially and staffing is at an all-time low. Many of our centers are experiencing record turnover. It's a very challenging time in healthcare and to be a patient in the healthcare ecosystem. And as we reemerge as a community, it's time to recommit to our common goal of increasing remission rates across the network, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic background. Despite the hardships in the system that we all experience, we're asking each of you to recommit to helping us close those gaps that remain and increase the pace at which we're moving. The only way that we can do this is together as a community with everybody working at the top of their game. We do have the momentum and we need to reinvigorate the motivation and keep us moving forward. Slide. In Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, he says that there's a gap between a vision or a goal and the reality of the system that exists. And this gap is really a source of energy that he goes on to call creative tension. And the tension will be used by those that have some sort of a personal mastery to keep learning and making improvement. Senge says that it is not what the vision is, it is what the vision does. How does the vision or the gap motivate us to take action, to build on our collective momentum? Each of us here tonight, regardless of what your role is, possess your own personal mastery and ability to keep learning and making improvements to the system that we're all a part of, regardless of our role. So how do we harness these improvements to reinvigorate the system? Slide. So again, over the course of the evening, be thinking about what you can do within your own locus of control, within your own family unit, within your own center, to help us continue to shine our spotlight on the gap that we have yet to close. How does what you hear tonight motivate you to help us work to close that gap? And I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Shahzad Saeed, our clinical director, to talk a little bit about some of the work that's happened in the network and where we have yet to go over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Kristen. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing some of the vision and mission and Dr. Rivers' philosophy with us. This can help us sort of focus on what the vision of ICN has been and how that has actually transformed into some of the strategic planning process and goals that we have put in place. So Chris, if you can go to the next slide. For a lot of us, these strategic domains or buckets would not be new. It's focused on the 5 major domains of outcomes, equity, sustainability, engagement, and technology. I'm not going to go through all of them. We're going to actually talk a little bit about each of those domains in the next few slides. So can you go up to the next slide, please, Chris? So, our outcome goal has been to increase the remission rates across the network by 0.5 to 1% per year by the end of 2024 through intentional QI and research endeavors. And in order to achieve that goal, we have our framework of functioning, which is the pathway to mastery. And we have different learning labs that achieve some of these outcome goals. As a result of some of these focus activities, we've moved 22 sites across the pathway into the next phase of their functioning and deliverables. We have also refocused on the most critical strategies to set up our goals and have updated our model care guidelines and have built the process for updating them every 3 years or so. We are also planning to conduct a structured design process to identify strategies and research required to continue the improvement activities and outcomes. Next slide. The next domain on the strategic plan is that of equity. We have stood up a DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, which reports directly to the board, and has started work on defining the current state of our network's race and ethnicity status to inform defining and bridging the gap in outcomes, to decrease the gap in remission rates between patients of color and white patients by 5%. Can you go to the next slide? And as you can see on this slide, thanks, Chris, there's a difference in outcomes in clinical remission between patients of color and our white patients in both clinical remission and sustained remission. So the goal of the DEI is to reduce this, DEI committee's activities to reduce this, this gap, and hopefully by reducing this gap, we are also going to improve the remission rates for the whole network. You will hear about some of the DEI committees later on. In addition, we are preparing to launch a Pfizer-funded DEI project in the CSPC Learning Lab, which will focus on evaluating inequities in personalized care for children with IBD. We have also focused on increasing the diversity in our staff, committees, and the board itself. Additionally, our new registry now enables us to stratify data by race and produces a nice demographic report that our centers can begin to engage with in support of our efforts. The DEI committee also undertook a deeper dive of some of the centers who are doing a great job of DEI work and sharing these in one of the existing learning labs. And you will hear from in the Ignite talk some of the work potentially that can be happening in that area. Next slide, please. The next bucket of our strategic plan is that of sustainability. Our goal is to build and develop a more sustainable and diversified funding, research, and leadership stream and structure to advance the mission while identifying and developing the next generation of community leadership. We have, over the last couple of years, 25 plus centers have approached or inquired about joining the network. And out of these 25 approaches, 8 centers actually did join the network with the conversion rate of 25 to 30%. We have also onboarded new leadership within several committees and the board. We have also really focused on research activities. So since 2020, 27 ImproveCareNow PI-initiated studies have been launched within the network. There are 33 centers with PIs leading current research studies. There are 78 centers that are involved in ICN research, and 3 industry-funded research studies are underway, with a couple of more being worked upon in the near future. And we have had 2 grant-funded studies since 2020. A lot of this research activity has resulted in about 15 manuscripts published since 2020. And we are also focusing on high priority topics that required advanced data and advanced thinking. And our new registry would hopefully enable us to undertake a lot of those activities. We have also published on the specific carbohydrate diet project, as well as finished the combined study and working on a very unique real world evidence and data work for pediatric approval for a biologic therapy. So lots of good activities happening in the sustainability bucket of the strategic plan. Next slide, please. As I said, the next bucket is that of engagement, and we are hoping and focusing on strengthening the presence of ImproveCareNow as a thought leader in the pediatric IBD community. As I previously shared, we continue to generate interest for new centers joining the network. Our site retention remains very high, and to keep that at that level, engagement is an even more important aspect. We have also onboarded key stakeholder groups within the network, and examples being the surgery group, as well as the autoimmune liver and hepatitis group. And we are also looking at funding, have actually received funding from Clear Foundation to look at how the value engagement results into more improved outcomes. Next slide, please. I think we are missing one, which is that, well, yeah, sorry. This slide also actually highlights the results of sustainability and engagement buckets with all 10 out of 10 honor roll children's hospital being part of the network, and 43 of the top 50 pediatric GI programs being part of the network as well. Again, reflecting the broad presence and impact of centers that participate in ImproveCareNow, which is again not only reflective of the centers, but you all as important stakeholders of those centers with parents and patients' perspective being part of the network and the centers. Next slide, please. And the last bucket of our strategic plan is that of technology. And we are really looking forward to and happy to see a new enhanced modular user-friendly registry being put in place that will allow us to drive improvement in outcomes, pre-visit planning, population management, ability to slice and dice real-time data, enable electronic data transfers, and ongoing activity and engagement through our platform and social activity hub, space that we call as the hub. Next slide, please. So, as you all heard about Doc Rivers and his highlight and focus on the gap. 2 years after becoming the coach of Boston Celtics, the Celtics did win the NBA title in 2008 and against the LA Lakers, which was one of the great finals of all times. And afterwards, Dr. Rivers said that as a coach, his job was to get his team to never stop fighting and never stop focusing on the gap. Next slide, please. So as ImproveCareNow improvers, it is our job to never stop focusing on the gap and pushing each other to do better every day for the families in our community and the patients that make our community what it is. Thank you all. I think I'm handing it back to Chris, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Shahzad and Kristen for sharing a little bit about ImproveCareNow. I want to say, though, we haven't heard from a patient advocate or a caregiver, family advocate yet. Every session from now on is going to be was developed and created by either patients or patient advocates or family advocates. And that's a very important thing to notice about this network. At the core of what we do is patients, caregivers, families, clinicians working together to improve care. It's an effort of the whole community. And so with that in mind, I'm going to unshare my screen for a minute. And we're going to kick off the next section with an Ignite talk that was given by Maha at our in-person community conference. And you should see it starting right about now.
I have this friend. I've known them for almost 10 years, yet I feel like I'm learning something new about them every day. Describing this friend is a bit difficult. They can be annoying, interrupting my life at inconvenient times, frustrating as it feels like they aren't always listening to me. But they have also given me a lot of purpose and perspective that I didn't have before I met them. If my heavy-handed metaphor wasn't obvious yet, the friend I'm referring to is my IBD. For as long as I can remember, I can feel how my IBD has followed me. Whether it was how lightheaded I would feel just from attending school, spending hours at the dinner table trying to eat with an extreme loss of appetite, or going to sleep nauseous and in pain. I could feel the weight of carrying this friend wherever I went. I used to dance before I was diagnosed, and I loved it. The grace, the fluidity, moving to the heart of the music. But I hated dancing in front of the mirror because I couldn't recognize who I saw. I wasn't able to gain weight, and so I was stick thin. I was pale, and my face looked sunken. It took me a long time to be able to look in mirrors again. It wasn't until I was diagnosed that I realized what was staring back at me. I could finally identify who that friend was that was following me. It's no secret that IBD causes huge lifestyle changes. Between the symptoms, medications, side effects, diet, and psychosocial issues, there's hardly time to breathe. This constant companion managed to fuse with my life, whether I liked it or not, whether I had my diagnosis or not, and everything was affected. From brain fog affecting my academics to joint problems making me quit the violin dance. And the worst part of it all is that you can't see my friend. They are invisible, and any attempt at talking about this friend was silenced by cultural and societal stigma. I couldn't take it. I wanted to break up. But how? Is the solution controlling my disease as best as I can so that I don't notice it anymore? Or otherwise, maybe I can just live in denial. Seems easy enough, right? I'll admit, I tried it all. Any way to distance myself from my illness, to not let it define me and continue pursuing what I wanted. But it's tricky because it's so easy to be reminded of my friend's presence. It takes something as small as getting a stomach ache or something as big as my medication no longer working to remind me that I have this companion. So I started to wonder, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm not trying hard enough to understand my friend either. And what about other people? Did they have their own invisible friends? If I talk to them, can I learn more? So I set up a playdate. I connected with this incredible community of people with IBD, and it eventually led me here to ICN and the PAC. I met all sorts of incredible patients who had their own friends, all with totally unique characteristics. And being part of this community, having a support system of people who really get it, taught me something really valuable. I've been afraid of my friend this whole time, which is and always will be a valid and normal response. But by being afraid, I never gave myself the opportunity to envision a more full life, a life where my dreams and passions could coexist with my IBD, and maybe even be enriched because of this newfound perspective. This doesn't mean I always get along with my IBD, like any relationship, there are ebbs and flows. This past year, for example, I went from being in symptom and clinical remission in the first half to spontaneously being in a flare in the second half. It's times like those that make my friend feel like a frenemy. But this is a reality for so many IBD patients. We are constantly having to manage this relationship that is evolving and meaning something new, which gets really emotionally complicated. So it's important to remember to give ourselves grace. It's okay to feel conflicted and change your mind. But ultimately, we get to set the terms of this relationship. And for me, this means knowing that embracing my IBD, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and striving for my best life are not mutually exclusive. There is some inherent power in having an unflinching view of my chronic illness. Allowing myself to accept the vulnerability that comes with having IBD can actually be empowering, because now I'm staring directly in the mirror. And at last, I have learned to love the person looking back at me, friend and all.
So I know it's kind of hard to cheer or to give a round of applause on while we're apart. Feel free to use, if you know how to use the icons, that's great. I come from an organizing tradition, and so the snaps, right? Like, feel free to do that too. While we are celebrating Maha's Ignite Talk, I'm gonna pass it over to the folks who are going to present our first session tonight. Maddie, do I got you? You good?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, it's on y'all. All of us are really excited to hear your session. Take it away.
All right. So, hello, welcome to our session supporting the whole person in pediatric IBD care. We're focusing on navigating being a good patient and experiences of grief and chronic illness. My name is Maddie, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Patient Advisory Council. I'm going to open our presentation, and then Fiona, our other patient representative presenting today, is going to join in, and then I'm going to hand off to Dr. McKillop, who is our psychosocial professional presenting. What was that? Okay. I wanted to give a special thanks to the following members who contributed to the content of the session but weren't able to attend conference or attend the VCC today. And then please take note of the following confidentiality statement. All right, so here's a rough roadmap of what we'll be talking about today. Fiona and I will open with some patient perspectives on whole person care. And then our second section, like I mentioned, will be led by Dr. McKillop, who's a clinical psychologist. And then we'll bring these perspectives together at the end to talk about what interventions or suggestions we have for you for promoting whole person care. And then here are some of the goals, which I've already kind of mentioned, so I'll go ahead and skip over. All right, so the first section of this presentation is the patient perspective. And I'm going to let Fiona, I believe, present this.
All right, so first we'll be talking a little bit about why whole person care is important. So it offers the ability to empower patients to live the full, healthy lives that we want to live. That integrates all the different parts of ourselves by approaching us holistically and not just as a disease. So as a provider, by approaching patients holistically, you have the opportunity to provide clinical interventions, but also strengthen your relationship with your patient by getting to understand them as a whole person and discuss aspects of their health that may not have been previously accessible, such as like how aspects of their health influence other parts of their life or impact those other parts of their lives. And because of that deeper understanding, you then have the chance to provide more tailored advice and education based on individual patient situation and experience. And so most importantly, the bottom line is that whole person care becomes important because patients are more than their IBD. They're more than a disease. Next slide. So then we can talk a little bit about what whole person care actually looks like. So like the name suggests, it takes into account planning around the whole person. And every single patient is going to be different because we're each made up of this unique array of physical, emotional, and such factors, social factors as well. And so getting to know your patients provides the opportunity to understand each of those factors and how it influences their life with IBD. And then, so for a patient, this could look like they might attend school, they might be part of a religious community, and they might have different social identities. So getting an understanding of the whole person there is really key. And additionally, it's important to remember that patients come from unique physical, emotional, and spiritual and economic needs and backgrounds, among others. So just a few of the examples. Next slide. So again, like we've mentioned, illness is only one aspect of an IBD patient's life, but it inevitably intersects with and affects other aspects of patients' lives. So these complex interactions between a patient's life and their illness produce a unique set of experiences with corresponding different needs and preferences that, again, are going to be unique to each patient. So, but providing whole person care to an IBD patient means identifying and getting to know these unique needs and perspectives of each patient, and then integrating this new information into how you provide the care that you give. So, for example, we have this lovely story from Maddie that I'm going to share. So in the picture is 13-year-old Maddie, about 3 months after her diagnosis with Crohn's disease. And she has her NG tube in with her formula in her backpack, and she's holding a box of 4 baby chickens. So the backstory of how this happened was around when she was diagnosed, she wanted nothing more than to have a flock of chickens in her own backyard. So she was inpatient for NG tube training, and she told her care team about this dream of hers, and they were overwhelmingly thrilled to support her on this. So much so that her discharge orders included to get chickens. So after she was discharged, she got chickens. And the point here is to get to know your patients outside of their illness, to really support their whole life, as this will improve their quality of life. So for Maddie, nothing in the world improved her quality of life more than in that period of time than having those baby chickens. Now I think I'm passing it back to Maddie.
Thanks, Fiona, for sharing that. I'm going to talk a little bit about how grief plays into this idea of whole person care and how grief intersects with chronic illness. So moving forward, I'm going to refer to the term parts that Fiona kind of mentioned already, which I'll describe here. As we move through life with illness, we learn to adapt to a unique set of circumstances. For example, a school-age kiddo may adapt to a diagnosis of Crohn's by experiencing their medical treatment as an academic challenge. So this part of them is attempting to contextualize their illness by using tools they already know how to use. For example, grades, academic achievement. So these IBD patient parts, or the unique set of experiences that emerge from living with IBD, are all rooted in an idea of returning to a normal that doesn't exist anymore. These adaptations have good intentions, but they can oftentimes be overly rigid and prevent healthy translation into the full, vibrant life that is possible to live with illness. So I've attached a picture of me there with my NG tube right after my diagnosis. I was diagnosed when I was 13 years old. And there's a lot that has changed since I was diagnosed. And I really want to communicate that there is so much hope and there's so much potential to live a full, vibrant life with IBD. We don't need to get rid of these parts that are trying to take control when we don't feel like we're in control, but we do need to approach them with compassion and grieve the loss that the patient has experienced. This is how integration occurs. And this is why grief is such an essential part of living with chronic illness. All right, I'm going to pass the mic over to Dr. McKillop, and she's going to present some clinical perspectives.
Thank you so much, Maddie and Fiona. I always get, and Maha as well, I always get sort of chills and hearing patient perspectives. It always is so powerful. And I feel honored to be able to present with you today and to be asked to do this piece again for the virtual conference. I also want to apologize for my lighting. I only ever use Zoom during the daytime, and apparently the light in here is not very good. So thank you for bearing with me. My name is Dr. McKillop. Or Hannah McKillop. Feel free to go on to the next slide, Maddie. Thank you. As she mentioned, I'll be talking about sort of the research and clinical perspectives of grief and chronic illness and specific to IBD care. Dr. Jenny David, my counterpart here at Nationwide Children's Hospital, wasn't able to join us today, and I know she very much wanted to be here. So I hope I do her piece justice, and we'll kind of try to channel her as I'm giving the talk today. So I'd like to encourage everyone to kind of just take a moment and think about what grief means to you. It can mean so many different things, but the most common thing that people think of is loss after death of a loved one is, I would say, probably the most common example, but there are so many other ways we can experience grief in life. And that's why we're here to give this talk today. And you already heard from the patient side of things from Maddie and Fiona about what that has looked like for them. So as I talk, please continue to think about what grief means to you. Next slide, please. So I love that this is the title of the talk. And before I shared this piece to Maddie and Fiona, this was already the title of the talk, but regularly in clinical care, I do say that we think of a patient as a whole person, and there's maybe more to someone than just their GI tract that we talk so much about in the clinic visits where I see patients. And so I love that this is just how this is framed, because we are whole people, and there's our aspects of life and our daily, when we go about our daily life, that are so much more than just how we're feeling from our GI perspective. And we want to make sure to honor those and think about those and how all of those things integrate together. Whole person care is on a spectrum. It's not dichotomous, but some of the most popular dichotomies that are presented or that people think about are flare versus remission, or sort of living between flares even. Good patient versus a bad patient, which is something that Dr. David and I would very much like to just take off the board if we could remove those types of categories. Adherent versus non-adherent. And I always cringe with the term adherence sometimes, because there's so many factors that go into someone being able to take medication on a regular basis or be able to present for infusions or other types of treatment. And I wish that there was a different term that we could think of that honored that. And grief has a potential impact on so many aspects of care and also someone living their life with IBD. Next slide, please. So there's a little bit of research on grief and chronic illness in general. As we've talked about, it's multifactorial, may include loss of pre-illness identity, like we've heard about, and loss of changes to future dreams. Although our hope is that if someone finds the medicine that works for them and they're able to continue to take it successfully, that they're able to live that healthy and vibrant life that Maddie mentioned. Grief can be dynamic and can change over time for patients and families, ebbs and flows. There may be years down the line where people continue to experience aspects of grief. And in my mind, that's to be expected. And grief can also present in different times and aspects of care, like medical and surgical decisions. So for example, if someone is changing to a different treatment, or grief related to removing a part of the body, like we see with a colectomy, or even adding a piece like with an ostomy. And grief can be distinct for patients, parents, and also healthcare providers. There is very limited research about grief in pediatric chronic illness, and even less so in pediatric IBD. Next slide, please. Some of the anecdotal pieces that I found when trying to explore grief earlier on in my career, I just wanted to share a few of these quotes with you. So one is that when people experience acute illnesses, there's a short grieving process because there's that knowledge that it's temporary. But for people with chronic illnesses, it's obviously very different, as we've been hearing about, and there's continual opportunities for that grief to reappear. And it can come in many forms, like the path one thought they'd take, or that needing to adjust to the new normal that is forced on you. Just like Maddie was mentioning earlier, with a normal that looks different than how one imagined it before. I often hear from patients that well-meaning people who share with them that they're tough or are troopers is, I think, sometimes wonderful to hear, and at the same time also very challenging to hear, because what I hear on my end is that patients say, I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be tough. And I think that plays a role in the grief process as well. Next slide, please. So what is seen in the literature is a term called chronic sorrow in relation to grief and chronic illness. And that really reflects the continual losses and periodic sadness that occurs for somebody with chronic illness, where there's no predictable end to it. There are external and internal stimuli that can trigger those feelings of loss, disappointment, fear, and this can progress and, like I mentioned, ebb and flow over time. There's another term that is found in the literature called disenfranchised grief. And I would call back to Maha's talk earlier about not being able to talk about her illness at times, or feeling like it's hard to bring up the fact that someone doesn't feel well or doesn't feel like they have the energy to spend time with friends, or may need to prioritize certain things like being able to study for a test and then have time to recover before they have the energy to do other things. Next slide. There's a little bit of research on pediatric IBD, but it's specific to parents. And what we did see was that there's a lot of ideas around grief at chronic illness. So parents mentioned experiencing shock, anger, confusion, sadness, guilt, denial, just a whole host of different emotions. And uncertainty can very much amplify these emotions. And we've seen that in the last few years with the pandemic and how things have changed with masks and not wearing masks. Are we going to school and work? Are we not going to school and work? And that uncertainty just amplifies what we're already feeling and can make it more challenging to cope with things. And I think in the context of surgical conversations or at diagnosis, do we know what the specific diagnosis is? What is the treatment going to be? All that uncertainty can add to the difficulty in coping. Length of time to diagnosis can also play a role, but that can be whether it's a quick change or a long process for years to get to the point where we learn that someone's symptoms are likely caused by IBD. And then one of the other pieces that struck a chord for parents was the perceived loss of a child's ability to have a quote unquote normal life. But then there was also the focus on the chronic grief that I've been talking about. So it can be periodic, but also pervasive and sometimes progressive in nature and worsening over time. It can be triggered by multiple factors. Some of those factors were hurtful comments from other people who might be well-meaning, but don't really understand what's going on. And I think some of the things that I'm about to mention might ring true for patients just as much as parents and caregivers. When one is asked to repeat the medical history of the patient, hearing stories from others, whether it's somebody else with IBD or their story, sometimes that can be helpful, but also can be hurtful, especially early on in diagnosis when someone's just wrapping their mind around what this means. And even the uncertainty when going for tests and medical appointments with their child, the retelling of the story can be re-traumatizing for everyone involved at times as well. And even some of the sort of more sensory triggers that we think about, like the smell of the hospital. I know I get a lot of nods when I bring that one up. Or at least in our hospital, the Miralax for the first clean out, if they're in the hospital, is almost always in blue Powerade. And so many of the patients that I talk to can no longer drink blue Powerade. And if they see that again, it brings up some really visceral memories for them. Next slide, please. So there is a little bit of research around grief with surgical decision-making, and we want to apply, and we're trying to apply this to pediatric IBD care as well. The language of failing treatments, which is a really tough one, and we try to work with people on how do we reframe what failing treatments means. That's not that a patient has failed the treatment. It means that the treatment has not worked for their body. But there are many ways to think about how we can frame things. There's a lot of power in the words that we use, and how do we think about that? Grief related to changes to the body, for example, like I mentioned earlier, removing an organ, like with a colectomy. So one thing to think about is if at the beginning of treatment or surgical conversations, if we think about or talk about it like it's the last resort and a terrible thing, then if that is the path that somebody ends up taking in the end, that's the frame of thinking that they have, the frame of mind that they have for that next part of their journey with IBD. And there may be other ways that we can talk about it with families and caregivers and patients. I think grief related to lack of choice, which is part of what I highlighted earlier, and then independence as well. Your patients and families rely on caregivers to give them lots of information, but also, what are the next steps? Where do we go from here? What can we expect? Next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight sort of what the stages of grief are very briefly, and more than anything else, I really would love people just to see this graphic because I think it so accurately represents what the experience of grief is, which is that these stages, the 5 of which are the first that were identified by Dr. Kubler-Ross early on in the 60s and 70s, it does not happen in a linear fashion like the top of the picture. We may experience all stages of grief at one time. We may be in anger for a whole year. We may be in bargaining, where we think about, is there anything I could have done to prevent this or make this go differently? At different times, we may experience multiple stages of grief at the same time. And Dr. Kubler-Ross's protege, Dr. David Kessler, added another stage, which was finding meaning, which is a lot of where I talk with patients and families about how do we find meaning, make meaning out of IBD being part of life and as a part of acceptance and sort of, joining the pack or doing other types of things that are meaningful to us that help us work through the grief that one experiences with chronic illness. Next slide, please. So this is a visual representation that we love because we don't think that we actually just get over our grief. What we find is that we learn to live around our grief, and we can grow bigger and life grows bigger around the grief that we have with our chronic illness, but grief stays the same. We may find that we are able to cope in different ways or have better ways to cope with grief, but that the grief itself does not get smaller or go away. We often hear that 1 year after somebody experiences a loss that they should be over it by now, and that's just not at all how it works. And as we've mentioned and tried to highlight throughout this talk, that this is something that happens throughout a lifetime. Next slide, please. Just one more image I wanted to share. This was another piece that Dr. David found. So growing around grief, the expectation in the top row there is that there's a leaf there that's somewhat broken, but that it heals or fixes itself and continues to grow. But in reality, we think about, okay, that leaf is still there and may progress and change over time, but that the plant itself continues to grow in lots of ways. The pain of grief doesn't disappear necessarily, but life, again, slowly grows around it. All right, I think that then transitions into our next piece. Oh, last one. One piece that I wanted to share too is I am not my illness, but my illness is a part of me. And I think these are just a few different representations of ways we try to reframe and think about life with IBD. Okay. Thank you, Maddie.
Thank you so much, Dr. McKillop. So the last section of this presentation focuses on what you as providers, parents, or caregivers to patients, or as a patient yourself, what can you advocate for with regards to whole person care? So as a provider, if you are a provider, I'm a patient, but if you're a provider, the first step in promoting whole person care is building trust. Because an essential part of whole person care is understanding the whole person, but learning to ask questions means learning to listen. And patients need a foundation of trust before vulnerability can happen. And so facilitating a safe clinic environment, starting off with questions that feel safe to the patient is a really great place to start. And then number 2, coordinating care and collaborating. As if you are a provider, you're human and you can't do everything. It's not reasonable. So we're not expecting you to address every single part of the whole person. Rather, the expectation is that you learn to collaborate with other providers, coordinate care, offer referrals. Some things that I've found helpful in my own care: physical therapy has been a really helpful outlet. So has psychosocial intervention. There's a lot of areas of a patient's care that can be addressed outside of the GI clinic. And then lastly, providing resources to support and empower. So this may mean simply providing a toolkit. We have lots of toolkits created by the Patient Advisory Council, but also learning to make meaning out of illness, which is something that Dr. McKillop mentioned with the Kubler-Ross stages of grief. But how do we integrate illness into who we are as people, find meaning, and learn to integrate our illness into our lives? So see, the next slide has some ideas. I'll let Fiona talk about this.
That's good. So going off of what Maddie said, here's just some resources for patients. The PAC has co-created a bunch of resources like the toolkits Maddie mentioned. And these are all accessible through the ImproveCareNow website, or additionally on the new PAC website, ibdpatient.org. And there is a survey at the beginning, sort of to guide you to the direction that you need, of maybe what resources are going to be most helpful at the current time. Yeah, or you can use the QR code on the slide.
So from the clinical perspective, Dr. David and I wanted to make a call to action. So clearly we need research in pediatric IBD, and specifically in how to navigate different care points, like at new diagnosis and surgery, how to balance how much information to give and when, how to assess and integrate grief assessment and support into care regularly and just as part of the standard of care. I'm considering the role of grief in the long-term care of patients, but also families and caregivers, and even the healthcare providers who provide the care as well. So one call to action might be for our psychosocial providers. I'm not sure if there are any on the call, but and this may be something that we can ask as an organization of the different centers that participate in ICN. How do we assess for grief, like I mentioned, just sort of as part of the standard of care in encounters? Next slide, please. For providers and caregivers, we really want to normalize and validate and also support that grief process that we shared. Model for the patient your own grief processes. We all experience it, and to show that these are real feelings is an important way for patients to know that they can share theirs as well. Early in diagnosis, we want to consider patient and family's prior knowledge. For example, if they hear about a horror story and that's their only context for what Crohn's looks like or ulcerative colitis looks like, then that may impact how they receive the news about a diagnosis. And then just chronic illness in general as well. If somebody's not familiar with IBD, but they've heard about diabetes, they may initially expect that this involves shots every day, multiple shots every day, or things like that. So a way to kind of get a sense of where people are coming from first and helping to share what we expect in care. Recommending professional mental health care for support. You don't need a GI or IBD specific psychologist to receive help in learning how to cope with grief within chronic illness or live a wonderful, vibrant, meaningful life with IBD. But what we can do sometimes with our specialty role, I suppose, as GI psychologists, is to provide a little bit of consultation for other providers in the community specific to that GI role, like what is a stool calprotectin and those kinds of things, and why might that be something that's hard for a patient to think about doing, and how we can help support someone, patient and family, with that process. We really want to call to these pivotal moments in care and in living a life with IBD. So checking in on coping, not only at new diagnosis, but immediately after, but also months after. And then at any kinds of these moments where surgical discussions may be occurring or changes in treatment, or if someone is experiencing a flare. If we hear language like someone seems to be living life just between flares and then feel like they're out for the count, we want to try to find a way to help someone support and live life at all aspects at all times. And lastly, from this piece, just trying to recognize that medical trauma can complicate grief, and it can play a role in adherence challenges as well, and may look different across different patient characteristics and family characteristics as well. Next slide. For patients, this is kind of a call to that making meaning piece that I was referring to earlier, and there's so many ways this can look for someone. one of the most important things we wanted to share is that experiencing grief with IBD is valid, and we want everyone to feel that and be able to remind themselves of that. There are times where grief can become pathological or problematic or clinical for someone, but at their, just to experience them in general is a natural part of the process of coping with a chronic illness. To help others understand, you could have them recall what it feels like to have a short-lived illness, and then try to extrapolate from there what a life with a chronic illness would look like and how that would differ. We found, although have not used ourselves, an app made by the Crohn's and Colitis UK organization called In My Shoes, where somebody can, for 24 hours, their phone sort of acts as if it's IBD, and it buzzes and wakes people up at 4 a.m. to have a bowel movement and those kinds of things. And so it's maybe a way to kind of help someone get a sense of what it might be like to live a life with IBD for 24 hours. There's lots of information, much of which has been called out already with the ICN toolkits that are amazing, and I share all the time because they're wonderful and can be supportive at many different stages of someone's life with IBD. Connecting with others, whether that's through the PAC or through the local centers, and the same goes for parents and caregivers as well. One of the ways to make meaning would be joining the PAC, having advocacy as a piece to life with IBD and sharing, helping others through their journey. And just sort of lastly, being kind to yourself. Maddie called attention to focusing on what you can control earlier, and that's sometimes hard for us to take a step back and realize what are the things that I do have control of, and maybe we just focus on making it from day to day until I can think about the larger picture in different stages. And then knowing when to seek professional help for support, from social worker resources to therapy, to asking your doctor questions so that you feel like you fully understand what is going on. All right. That's the end of my piece. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening in. This is the end of our presentation. I hope that this was useful and validating, and really appreciate you taking the time to listen.
Thank you all so much. A couple of things I want to highlight before we pass it over to our Patient Family Advisory Council to share. One, reoccurring themes that you heard in there: empower, co-production, working together. I want to reinforce that a big part of the strength of this network is that everybody is involved in growing and learning together. Without further ado, Heidi and Ildiko are our Patient Family Advisory Council leads. They're going to talk about what they're going to be doing. And then Maddie and her co-lead of the PAC, Becky, they'll be coming back to talk about our Patient Advisory Council.
All right, great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much, Maddie, Fiona, and Dr. McKillop. That was a great presentation, as always. Chris, you can go ahead and advance the next slide. So I wanted to give a warm welcome to anyone that's new to ICN, especially if you're a caregiver, even if you're a patient, an ICN staff member, or clinician. On this slide, you're going to see what ICN's vision is. And we're going to talk about who is the ImproveCareNow PFAC. Well, our PFAC is the new acronym for our Parent Family Advisory Group. We used to be known as the Parent Working Group, which we just sort of felt didn't chime right and just sort of had the wrong connotation. So this is what we've come up with. On the slide, it lists our purpose and mission statement, which I'm not going to bother reading. You can read that yourself. What I did want to elaborate on is that the heart of our PFAC are our caregivers. It is their ideas, our passion, our time, our financial burdens, our trauma that we have experienced as families. And I'm going to stress, when I say families, it's not just the parents, it's the siblings, of our children, it's our grandparents and aunts and uncles and close family and friends. It's our desire to be heard and have our experiences be seen. All of it matters. Next slide. So as caregivers, and going back to sort of what makes us, our PFAC, I feel one of our unique things is our diversity. We have parents and caregivers that are in many different stages when they join ICN. Some of them have children that were diagnosed with IBD when they were infants, some as teenagers, some as college-age adults. We have caregivers of many different races and religions, and we represent the whole of the United States, which I love. We're coast to coast. I would love to see our PFAC even go international, because I do know we have international ICN centers. Ildiko and I are your co-leads. I'm located in Atlanta, and I have a 22-year-old son who was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis when he was 16. And he has been through the colectomy and J-pouch series. Ildiko has a daughter who is a freshman in high school and is in Philadelphia. And I believe I have this right. Ildiko's daughter was diagnosed with Crohn's when she was 9. We stepped into our co-lead role back in April. And you're going to hear us say this a lot, but we would love for all of you caregivers that are listening to join our group. Next slide, please. So what have we been up to? Well, we've been up to a lot. Ildiko and I have been very busy for the last 6 months. We are continually looking to see where we can improve things. As Peter Margolis said in a meeting that we were all in last night, we are an improvement organization. We have been meeting with lots of different people inside and outside of ICN. We're brainstorming, we're onboarding new caregiver leads. We're trying to re-engage with our veteran parents who we do not want to lose. But we really want to know, how can our PFAC benefit all the stakeholders within ICN in the short, medium, and long term? And you are always welcome to reach out to Ildiko and I at any point. Next slide, please. So what are ICN centers doing according to parents from coast to coast? So the picture you see on this slide is a break from our breakout session at the Dallas Fall Community Conference. We put some poster paper up and we asked parents, what are your centers doing? Centers are doing amazing things, and we are big on sharing ideas and stealing ideas within ICN. So I love all the different things that are listed here. We have everything from cooking demos and art therapy programs to, monthly new education programs to one-on-one mentoring programs. I know in Atlanta, that is something that, we've been looking at as well as mentoring. I think it's so important that caregivers, no matter where they're located, know that you're not alone. So it's important to know that your voice matters even within your local center, and any ideas that you have or things that you want to see be done. One of our goals with our PFAC is to share what are we doing at our different centers. Next slide, please. So we also asked, what would you like to see our PFAC do? So these again were, different responses again from caregivers. There are so many different things, the list is endless as to what we want for our children as caregivers. Support, non-invasive monitoring, creating caregiver, toolkits, more parent connections, boots on the ground, mentors and coaches, better connections between doctors, better outcomes and treatments. I've had parents say to me they need assistance in dealing with insurance. The financial component of this diagnosis is huge for families. So we, again, want to hear from you. So please understand it takes a village, and, Ildiko and I and our whole PFAC are here to support all of you. Next slide, please. So I think it's important that you guys know who your PFAC is. Well, we're a pretty small group as far as leads. When you think of leads, for anyone that's new to ICN, simply put your mind in the context of a school PTA board. Okay, so Martha is our communications lead. She's been our communication lead for the last 2 years, and she's located out of Oklahoma. She does our monthly newsletters and manages our Facebook page, and she's been a past Ignite speaker. Carrie Ward is located out of Orange County. She's been our membership guru for probably the last 3 years at least. She's probably one of the first emails that you get after you get an ICN email welcoming you to our PFAC. She is also a past Ignite speaker. They are both looking for someone to work alongside with them, or even people to join their committees and help. So again, if you know someone, if you're a clinician somewhere in the United States and have a list of parents that want to become more involved, please send them our way. Next slide, please. We also have 2 new connection leads, although the amazing women that are in these roles are not new. Maria Tribble is out of San Francisco, and I believe she's on the call. She was our former PFAC all-call coordinator, so she was the one who did our monthly meetings for a good 3 years, probably 3+ years. And Maria Lester is out of Nemours, Orlando, and she is a past Ignite speaker and was our past communications lead. Both of Maria, and they go by the term now, Team M&M, they're working together to help represent leads at ICN centers to help identify any gaps we have and build bridges and relationships. Next slide, please. So as I close and wrap up, I've put some pictures on here from past conferences. Several of these are from Dallas. One is actually from Chicago in 2019. And I did slip a picture of my son in there with his permission. It was actually used when I gave an Ignite talk a couple years ago. And it shows us in the hospital when he was in the ICU after he had major complications after what was supposed to be a very simple last IBD surgery. But, I slipped his picture in here because he's my reason that I'm still here. He's my reason that I want to share my story to help other families. So just, Ildiko and I really want all caregivers and parents that are listening to this to know that we want you to join us. We would love to have you. Even if you're a bit timid and not sure what it's still about, please reach out to us and let us know. We would love to have any clinicians that are listening point any parents our direction that want to get more involved. We have lots of ways for them to be involved. We're looking to work closely with the PAC as well, and with other entities within ICN. Wanted to make sure that any of our caregivers listening know that our last PFAC monthly meeting for the year will be this Monday, November 14th. So please look at joining us then. And we are always open to listening. Actually, any of our leads are. So whether it's for both Maria's, Carrie, Martha, any of us. Just wanted to thank you so much for listening and the opportunity to present, and just wanted to let Ildiko if she had any last words.
Hi, I'm not sure if you can see me. I can still see your screen, Heidi, but I just wanted to, obviously Heidi does just an absolutely phenomenal job, not just as a co-lead for PFAC, but in these presentations. So thank you so much, Heidi, for doing that for us. I just wanted to say hello. I'm here as well, and I echo absolutely everything Heidi said. we would really love to get as many parents, caregivers, family members involved in PFAC as we possibly can. We really want that diversity of perspective. And by diversity, I mean that in every sense of that term, of different experiences, because every new experience brings something to the table. So the more people we can have involved and engaged, the stronger our collective voice as parents will be. And I truly believe that in addition to the patients, it really is the patient and parent voice that when it comes together and is presented, in a unified way, we really can get a lot done. We have a strong voice. We can work together to accomplish a lot across stakeholders, but we really do need that parent community to continue to build and grow. And we have this amazing, amazing group that you're seeing pictures of on your screen. Many, thankfully, were able to attend Dallas, but I also completely understand that not everybody can attend a live conference. So most of what we do is virtual. So please join us. Thank you all for being here and for being engaged in ICN and for supporting our kids. It really means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for sharing and for leading the PFAC. I know that it's been the source of a great amount of support and learning for a number of patients, caregivers, family members. Thank you. With that in mind, I want to pass things over to Maddie and I think Becky, maybe, yeah. I'll come on after your session for like 2 or 3 minutes, but for everyone on the call, this is basically the last session of the evening. Maddie, Becky, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. I'm so glad to talk with you all tonight and get to present with Maddie, who you all have heard from already. Maddie and I are the current co-chairs for ImproveCareNow's Patient Advisory Council, or the PAC, which you've heard about already tonight. And I'm really looking forward to sharing more about who we are and what we're doing and why patients being part of this voice, along with parents like Ildiko and Heidi were just mentioning, is so important to the work that ICN does. So we can launch right into our IBD stories just to contextualize where we're coming from. So I like to joke a lot that I actually beat Maddie to IBD because I was diagnosed a handful of years earlier than she was. And that's, I guess, my little joke. I love to make IBD jokes because I think we need some more poop jokes and more poop humor in the world. So I was diagnosed at 7. Originally, my mom thought it was lactose intolerance. And it was, in fact, lactose intolerance, but it was also Crohn's. So kind of a double whammy there. But I was diagnosed with Crohn's when I was 7, had symptoms since probably at least age 5. And I've had a lot of different treatments, one of which is prednisone. So you can see in the photo in the left and in the middle, I have quite the prednisone moon face. I think the left photo makes me look 12. The middle photo, I think I look like 9 or 10. I'm actually 15 in both of those. That was taken around the time I had my ileostomy placed. So when I was 15 years old in 2017, my colon was closing. So I ended up having a diverting ostomy, which was one of the best medical decisions I've made for myself. I had a good 4 years with it. I even named it Ozzy the Ostomy, created a whole like alter ego for it, had to have fun with it. And that really helped me feel a lot better and got me into a not entirely asymptomatic, but pretty close to it state for the first time since I'd been diagnosed. And then the photo in the far right was taken in my freshman year of college. I had most of my colon removed. Technically, in the photo, I'm telling my friends it was all of my colon removed, but I didn't really think my GI typical friends would understand what a subtotal colectomy was. So I just gave them the simplified version. But that was after a lot of issues with my colon not healing from the original reason I got my ostomy surgery. So I made the choice to just do away with it, and I'm in remission for the first time now. So going on, I can't do math, I think 13 years now with Crohn's disease, and finally feeling well, which has been really exciting. And I'll pass it off now to Maddie to hear her story.
All right. Hi, I've already met you guys because I presented previously, but I'm Maddie and I am Becky's co-chair of the PAC. I'm a junior in college and I'm studying nursing at George Fox University in Portland, Oregon. And I was diagnosed with Crohn's when I was 13 years old, like I mentioned before. So yes, Becky beat me to it. Picture number 2 is right before the colonoscopy where I was diagnosed. I used exclusive enteral nutrition as my induction therapy, and I learned to place my own NG tube as seen in image number 1. My amazing nurse was trying to help me there, but I was really determined to place it on my own, which I did. I've never had anybody else place an NG tube for me. I started participating in ICN at my care center around 2016, which is about a year after I was diagnosed. And then soon after that, I got involved with the PAC, and then I started working at the national level, and I attended my first community conference. And then from there, the rest is history. I can't imagine what my life would look like without ICN and the PAC. So Becky and I are going to talk about why we think patient engagement is such a significant thing and why we believe our time in the PAC has really changed our lives for the better. We discussed the challenges that we were faced with. We were both diagnosed with a chronic illness at an early age. We learned that our bodies weren't going to be functioning the way that most people's bodies functioned, and we learned that we were different from our peers, friends, and family. We had to adapt to a lot of different circumstances, including countless appointments, procedures, sick days, and treatments. And understandably, this kind of life experience can leave a kiddo feeling pretty isolated. Not to mention that IBD often presents as an invisible illness. However, through ICN, we were offered opportunities to use our experience as patients to improve the care that other patients received, to use these complex, painful feelings of isolation to fuel community-based advocacy work, to build a network of relationships that would remove the barriers of loneliness that IBD had placed on our lives, and to move from a story of self to a story of us. So you might be wondering what happened when we moved from a story of self to a story of us. What was the product of this immense transformation? I'm happy to present you with the outcome. Becky posing as the amazing IBD advocate that she is, and this is supposed to be funny. I'm not gonna lie. The second photo isn't my favorite of all time, but over the years, it has really grown on me. For one, I really love Becky's face. One might go as far as to say she looks like she's passing a bowel movement. And then I'm just chilling in the back there, probably wondering if the gas that I had that morning smelled bad enough to ruin the new friendships that I had made in the PAC. But spoiler, it wasn't, because the whole PAC thing worked out pretty okay. But the point of my story relates back to the story of self narrative, the story of us narrative that I mentioned previously. The confidence, relational connection, and securities these pictures represent was nuanced for Becky and I at the time. The second picture there is at my first conference and one of Becky's early conferences. It was something that emerged when Becky and I found the PAC, when we learned to use our voice as patients and heard the story of other IBD patients. It represents our movement into the bigger world we have come to know is possible with chronic illness, not despite it. Story of self to story of us.
So at this point, you've heard about the PAC, you've heard our stories, you've heard a presentation from PAC members, and some of you may be wondering what the PAC actually is and does. So in our name, the Patient Advisory Council, it does say patient advisory, and we do give feedback and we do give advice, but it really goes a lot beyond that. We have a really kind of partnership role within ICN, where we're sitting on ICN committees, on leadership teams, we're creating educational toolkits by patients for patients. We have our own Impact podcast, which features ICN community members as guest stars. We publish blogs on the ICN Loop. We come to conference and we present at conference. But really beyond that, we're also helping shape the priorities of the network and representing the IBD patient population in ICN. And so there's a lot of benefits of having patients engaged in such a high level, more than just advisory, but again, getting this partnership level. We're helping give the patient perspective on projects and initiatives, and we're operating at the level of co-production and ownership, where we're not just giving feedback on initiatives, we're on a leadership team. So we're not just advisors, we're drivers. And this is huge for improving clinical practices, improving care outcomes, and establishing these really powerful relationships. I'm going to talk to you all in the next couple of slides about how strong of a factor social connection is with our success and in ICN success. So Maddie showed that uber cringy photo earlier of the two of us at our first conference, and you can see it again in the bottom left. And this is really showing how much of a social connection we have in the pack. I actually tried to recruit Maddie at the first conference we went to, even though she was already in the pack. I didn't know this at the time, but thankfully I didn't scare her away. And now Maddie is my best friend, and one of those relationships I know will stay with me through the rest of my life. And this is really, I think, this similar story we're bringing when we join ICN. We're coming to improve care. And for patients, we're coming to make sure that care is improved in a way so that our experience is not the norm for patients. We're moving beyond ourselves. And I think being a patient engaged in a learning health network, such as ICN, is such a transformative experience for that reason. I joined when I was 14 years old, so I really grew up with this network, and it has entirely changed my life. It has shaped my college major and my interests. So for context, I'm a junior at University of Michigan. I'm studying public health and medical sociology, and that is hugely influenced by my work in ICN. ICN has also shaped my life and who I call lifelong friends, who I love. It shaped my mental health. And onto the presentation earlier, it shaped my ability to grieve and process and move on with my disease. And so again, it's really this community of shared purpose that makes ICN and the pack so powerful. And on the next slide, you can see some really funny little photos and cute examples of this social connection in the pack. We've got a really funny Puma Pants meme from Maddie herself. You can see we did a fun PowerPoint night. We get on Zoom calls and we joke around and laugh with each other. And you can also see how successful we are in some of these other photos. So you can see this podcast we've made, this landing page we've created that we'll talk about more. And I really feel that it is the pack social connection and goofiness that is taking us from motivation to momentum. It's a community of belonging and understanding in a way where I don't have to explain what I need and people just understand it because we've developed such a strong relationship.
So let's talk about the why, how, and what of the pack. Why do Becky and I understand the pack to be so significant? Becky's already talked about a lot of these aspects, but I'll go through a couple more. Leadership and personal growth. There are so many opportunities to grow interpersonally in patient advocacy, not only learning to integrate your own illness into your life, but as Becky mentioned, it's really shaped our career aspirations as well. It's valuable to us as well as to other patients. Like Becky mentioned, we're not just doing this for ourselves, we're doing this for other patients and moving from a story of self to a story of us. And again, people are the why. We are doing this because we know what it is like to feel alone, to feel isolated, or to feel like the care that we're receiving isn't to the level that we feel we need. And so we work on improving the quality of care that other patients are receiving. The how is we create space for interpersonal relational connection. We do Zoom calls and PowerPoint nights. We create resources for patients. And then there's also a really beautiful chain of mentorship that happens within the PAC, where younger members are mentored by older members, and there's a lot of career building that happens. It also really levels the hierarchy that exists naturally or not so naturally within healthcare, where different stakeholder groups can communicate on an equal playing field. And patients on ICN committees are not just passengers passively receiving care, but we are drivers of our own care.
And then again, onto that shared community and social connection, the PAC is a lot of things. There's a really famous video of me rolling around on the floor at an ICN conference yelling patient engagement, which I thought was peak comedy at the time. And so we're a lot of jokes, but we're also creating resources and giving this patient perspective. And it's really this balance between that social connection and that goofiness and allowing ourselves to be free and childlike with each other, but then also translating our lived experiences into actionable change. And that's really going back to this learning health network idea of all teach, all learn, where everyone has a unique perspective and we can all teach each other something and learn from each other. And this is why it's so important to have patients engaged in care. And when we say engaged in care, we mean engaging patients in their own clinical experiences, but also engage them at your local clinic. If you have a patient family advisory council, or start one, have them lead projects and encourage them to sign up for the PAC. And the PAC is really a partnership group, and the support group comes along with it. But it's really that advocacy work that is filling in that social connection. So really, most importantly, it's engaging and empowering your patients in their care and in ICN. It's giving us that voice, and you can see how we use this voice in so much of our work. Up on the slide Maddie has is a bunch of our PAC toolkits. So you can see lifestyle, accommodations, body image, so many and counting. A little fun story, the IBD accommodations toolkit, I helped lead this project. And about a year after we'd finished it, I received an email from my father. He was forwarding an email from a local support group for parents of kids with IBD that met at my old elementary school. And they were sharing this resource they'd found on the ICN website. And I remember feeling so empowered in that moment, seeing how it has come full circle, that the resource I'd helped work on for patients by patients in my room traveled across the world and came all the way back to my old elementary school. And I can really share that I've used these toolkits myself. I don't really think there's a single one of these that I haven't looked through and found advice from. I used the college and IBD toolkit when I was searching for colleges and applying to college. I looked at the transfer toolkit when I moved to college. I used the accommodations one all throughout high school and also still in college. I've looked at the body image one when I got my ostomy. It's been a really profound experience in the PAC. So again, please engage and empower your patients in their care. Please sign up and join us. We're always looking for new patients and new voices, and we love to welcome everyone into our PAC community.
That is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for joining. And I saw that some links were shared in the chat if you're interested in signing up and getting in contact with us.
I want to thank everybody for joining. I don't know. It's very inspiring to hear from everybody. We build a network so we can improve together. We appreciate y'all being here and hope and know that we'll have a chance to work together again. Thanks, everybody.